You can sense that there is a little bit of a big power dynamic ongoing, a lot of language that is reminiscent of a G2 approach. And I will tell you, behind the scenes, most countries in the Indo-Pacific are quietly quite anxious, uncertain what the president might do.
Welcome to So What's the Strategy? I'm your host, Matthew Kroenig. Today's episode will focus on America's strategy toward China and how it has evolved from the Biden to the Trump 2.0 administrations. For the past decade, many have argued that China poses the greatest threat to U.S. national security, and that addressing the China challenge is one of the few remaining areas of bipartisan consensus. The Trump 2.0 approach, however, seems to favor commercial diplomacy over competition and may be challenging these long-held assumptions. As President Trump plans a high-profile trip to China, this is an opportune time to reassess America's China strategy. To address this topic, we are joined today by Kurt Campbell. He's the chairman and co-founder of the Asia Group. He also served as the 22nd Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy Assistant to the President and Indo-Pacific Coordinator at the National Security Council and the White House from 2021 to 2024. Previously, Kurt served as Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, where he is widely credited as being the key architect of Obama's pivot to Asia. Former National Security Advisor General Brent Scowcroft used to challenge his team with a simple question. So what's the strategy? What do you want to do? And how are you going to do it? That's the focus of this show. On So What's the Strategy, we talk with senior government officials and leading experts about the strategies for addressing the most important security challenges facing the United States and the world. Let's get started. Kurt, thank you very much for joining us on So What's the Strategy?
Matt, it's my pleasure. It's so great to be with you today. Thank you.
Well, it's really an honor to have you. And as you know, President Trump is heading to China soon, so I want to get to that. But before we look ahead, I thought we could start by looking back at the Biden administration's China strategy. And as I recall, the strategy defined China as the only state with the ability to reshape international order, called for an invest, align, compete strategy, essentially strengthen ourselves, align with allies, compete with China. And I can't remember if this was in the formal strategy or not, but also there was some discussion about the goal being to responsibly manage the competition with China. So was that in hindsight, was that the right strategy, and how did it go in your view?
Look, Matt, it's a challenge, obviously, in the midst of a new administration like the Trump administration that has taken such pains to distance itself from not just the Biden administration, but frankly, every previous administration, Republican and Democratic alike, to really reflect in a dispassionate way what came before. But I think elements of the Biden-China policy, which were frankly quite bipartisan and animated by strong support from Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, I think most of those elements hold up, I think, quite effectively. And I think the key features, working closely with allies and partners, recognizing that there are key areas that will require investment and focus in technology, a recognition that, frankly, we cannot achieve our goals without working with others on the international scene, and building a new kind of architecture, utilizing institutions like the Quad to engage effectively in the Indo-Pacific. I think all of those, I think in retrospect, appear sound. I think the real issue is going to be, as we go forward, whether President Trump departs from some, many, or all of the animating principles that, frankly, were negotiated and navigated through strong bipartisan consensus.
Well, and I agree very much that working with allies and partners should be an important part of China's strategy. And you and your colleague Rush Doshi have done some good work on this after leaving government, showing that if it's us against China, that's 25% of global GDP to their 18%. But with allies and partners, well over half of global GDP. One area where the Biden strategy was criticized was by former Trump official Matt Pottinger, who said the goal should be not responsibly managing the competition, but winning the competition. What would you say to that, and what is the right goal? What does success look like in this competition?
Well, look, much of diplomacy is uh, deciding what you say openly and how you manage your affairs privately. Look, the United States always should work towards gaining advantages in global competition, but at the same time, I think we have to recognize with a powerful armed country, nuclear armed country like China, a degree of stability and management in the relationship, certainly in the near term, is in the best interests of both countries. But I think we felt that and I'm a big fan of Matt and his work, but some of the statements and approaches I thought were needlessly provocative. Basically arguing that, the Chinese Communist Party had to be defeated at all costs. It's hard to do consequential diplomacy with your counterpart when you're basically at the core of your argument is making the point that you are completely illegitimate. And so, there are some realities to diplomacy that have to be taken into account. And I think what we tried to basically state clearly is that the essential feature of the relationship between the United States and China was one of competition, and to not turn away from that recognition, but to embrace it and develop a strategy accordingly. But, Matt, it is also the case that some on the other side, more on the left, perhaps said, look, you didn't have a in state in mind about where you want to go. I'm not sure it's possible to describe that in state. I thought the most important thing we could do is understand the nature of the current challenges to the United States from China and develop a strategy accordingly.
Well, good points, and easier for a former official to write something in foreign affairs than for a current administration to
Yeah.
maybe say some of the same things.
I will also say one of the things I give Matt credit for, though, he had some frustrations with the Biden administration, which you've pointed out, but he has probably even more towards the Trump administration the second time around, and he has not been shy about expressing his concerns about what he views as a too open technology strategy, a lack of support to Taiwan. And I think we have to commend Matt that he is animated by what he believes is a strong set of principles and commitments.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Trump's current strategy because that's where I wanted to go next. And just a simple question. Does the Trump 2.0 administration have a coherent strategy for China, in your view?
So, I mean, I think one of the hardest things, Matt, and you experienced this as well. So, friends from abroad come to town, leaders from other countries, they want to know, your deepest thoughts about President Trump's strategy, his approach to the world. And even if you know on some deeper level that the president is quite transactional, his views can evolve on an hourly, daily basis, and that the dominant feature of his approach to global politics is one of unpredictability. You can know that deep down, but you're still constantly striving to read the tea leaves, trying to figure out what the hidden meaning is of one approach or another. And I think I worry, at least I'm guilty of over interpreting developments that the president might take. I would say just a couple of things about the consensus or lack thereof in the Trump administration with regard to China. I would say it is the biggest, broadest tent imaginable when it comes to China policy. You have officials inside the tent that believe that China is the next enemy of the United States and we have to get ready for that fundamental challenge, and others that think that's ridiculous. We can do business, and these are business people, and we can make a lot of money, and we can do, more commerce with them, and we can enrich our families and others. I think the president probably right now falls more into that second category than the first, but the truth is there are lots of indicators of moving pieces beneath the surface. I would say, it's fascinating to note. You mentioned that the president is scheduled to visit China in mid-May, and the Chinese have invited and accepted that visit. I do think we have to recognize, Matt, how extraordinary it is that the president is considering traveling in the midst of this conflict. It's quite unusual, but at the same time, it is unusual for China to be comfortable hosting them as well, given China's history and its commitment to Iran in particular, a country the United States is waging a brutal conflict against. I think that suggests that both leaders feel that they've got important things to do. President is clearly signaling his desire to have a good meeting with President Xi. A lot of his language suggests sort of a meeting of authoritarian minds. You can sense that there is a little bit of a big power dynamic ongoing, a lot of language that is reminiscent of a G2 approach. And I will tell you, behind the scenes, most countries in the Indo-Pacific are quietly quite anxious, uncertain what the president might do, might be, frankly, too open and liberal with technology, allowing China access to capabilities where we still have clear advantages. Worried that there might be some give on critical, long-standing bipartisan commitments around the maintenance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, and maybe even worried that the United States and China will seem to be taking positions over the heads of key allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, even India. All of those things will be on firm, very close display when the president potentially goes to China. I'm not completely clear, Matt, if the conflict is still ongoing and there's still uncertainty. And I think every expectation is that that might be the case. It's harder for the president to go to China. I still think he'll go, but there will be those that will argue better to stay home and attend to this. What do we call it? A mess, excursion, whatever. But, everything that, President Trump campaigned on, no more, deep, quicksand engagements in the Middle East, appear to be taking form right in front of our eyes here in Iran.
Well, let's stick on that point because I mentioned in the introduction that you were credited as being a key architect of Obama's pivot to Asia. Many national security experts have been arguing that the United States needs to do more in the Indo-Pacific. But looking at Trump 2.0 with Venezuela, with conflict still going on in Ukraine, with the war in Iran, is a pivot to Asia happening? Is it still possible, or are we condemned to keep getting bogged down in these other regions?
Well, Matt, it's an important point, and I've now seen over, several years, many strategists and commentators, making the argument that either the pivot was insufficient, it didn't have enough governmental and private sector depth, that, it was being hamstrung by, developments elsewhere. I do think there is now a broader recognition today than there was 20 years ago that the lion's share of the history of the 21st century will indeed be written in the Indo-Pacific. And we have to do more here. And that means across the board, developing strategy, capacity in every element of our government. I'm always struck when I go back in government, we have remarkable expertise on the Middle East and South Asia. If you want someone to tell you how to drill a well in Helmand Province, you can find the person that will give you the most incredible details about the ethnic composition, all the diagnostics about the government features in particular. But you ask larger questions about China or, the Indo-Pacific, and sometimes you are underwhelmed by some of the analysis or intelligence that you might receive. So I'm of the view that this journey is absolutely essential. I would be lying if I didn't betray some anxiety about how the president has conducted elements of his approach during the first year and a half. He's put many of our allies in a very difficult spot with respect to how he's spoken about them publicly, the steps that he's taken with respect to tariffs, again, some of the language about China. Those are all, anxiety provoking, but it is also the case several administrations, including the Trump administration, had carefully sought to basically build military and strategic capacity in the Indo-Pacific, a second aircraft carrier, more anti-ballistic missile capabilities, more capacities to our allies and partners. It is the case, Matt, in a very short order of time, literally after decades, years of building this capacity across the Indo-Pacific. Much of that has been vacated to the Middle East in short order. And Asian countries are privately worried that this substantial deterrent capability, it's not just the armaments we're talking about that have been basically utilized at unprecedented levels against Iran, but it is also the standing forces, the Marines, some of the the fighter aircraft, the aircraft carrier. Many of those have been diverted more and are on station in the Middle East. And I think there is worry about when and how they will return to the Indo-Pacific. So you are completely correct that I'm worried about elements of the comprehensive strategy that I think we have sought to build in the Indo-Pacific. The issues that really are of the greatest concern, though, are whether we can have confidence that the fabric of the alliance structure in the Indo-Pacific will hold. Now, despite taking a battering in commercial diplomacy and, harsh public lashing, most of these countries have stuck together and are prepared to work with the United States through thick and thin. That, on some level, Matt, is comforting, and it suggests that a future administration that is perhaps a bit more committed to a traditional internationalism will have something to resurrect. It will not be like the old system, Pax America, that served us, in my view, so well for 70 or 80 years, but there will be elements of this operating system that the United States helped build that will survive, in my view.
Well, you're so foresighted. You've anticipated some of my questions. I was going to ask about what a future administration might do. Does it snap back, or is it different? It sounds like you're saying there are elements of both, which I think makes sense. So coming now to the upcoming trip, and you pointed out that maybe it won't even take place, but what would a successful trip look like from your point of view, and what would a failure look like? What should President Trump be trying to avoid?
I mean, my hope would be a sober, careful meeting between the two leaders in which there was substantial back and forth about a number of areas of anxiety on the global stage, beginning with what I think are at least some shared interests between the United States and China when it comes to the opening of the straits, the hopefully cessation of conflict, the return to some elements of diplomacy. I think there are areas where the United States and China actually can find some degree of common cause, even in the midst of a pretty intense competition for power and privilege across the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. So I think actually a successful visit is really about a deep set of strategic conversations between the two leaders. Now, whether the president is comfortable or prepared for that, I'm just not sure. It appears that at least on some level that he wants quite a focus on commercial issues, whether on investment or on trade, would like to bring some potential CEOs with him. That's a little bit sort of out of the 1990s. I think some elements of that diplomacy, frankly, have passed by the way. I worry too much focus on commercial deals tends to obscure some of the strategic issues. But I think even those issues can be managed effectively if they are undertaken carefully and with the appropriate due diligence. I think the anxiety comes, Matt, if the president starts to think about basically lifting the floodgates on certain areas of AI capability, not just certain chips, but the ability to do lithography. China still lags there. We have some capabilities in lithography that are still cutting edge. There's been some discussions about, providing that to China. And also there are real worries about how the president is likely to talk about Taiwan. And, historically, and I reviewed some of the conversations between President Trump and President Xi from the first term, and there are occasional flourishes of language by the president that suggest that he doesn't have the same commitment to the maintenance of peace and stability that perhaps previous presidents have had, and that he might be prepared to think about leaning a little bit more towards China in how to consider the situation going forward. This is not lost on Chinese interlocutors, and I fully expect President Xi will try to push, cajole, and engage President Trump to get him more on China's side with respect to how the issues related to cross straits are thought about and proclaimed with respect to U.S. policy.
Well, that makes sense, and in some ways ties back to one of your first points that I agree, it does seem like there are two strands in the administration, some more focused on commercial diplomacy, and maybe the president's in that camp, others more focused on the security challenges, and so what is the kind of balance of those issues at the talks? Man, I
do want to just say though, I do agree that there is those competing voices. It would be hard to describe a more, thoroughgoing route, however, for that second group who have lost time and time again on arms sales, on focus on allies and partners, no meaning of the Quad. You can go down the list, and the president really has basically sought to orient himself very much with this first engage, what's the problem? Let's make some money with China group.
Well, it's a good point, and including many people in the administration arguing before the administration took shape that militarily we need to be focused on China. We can't get involved in the Middle East and elsewhere and do find ourselves in another big Middle East conflict.
And it is interesting that, the true issue that one sees when exploring the Trump administration is a remarkable, I'll put it this way, kindly or gently, intellectual flexibility, an ability to adopt your personal philosophies towards whatever the president in the moment believes is the right approach. That's fascinating, and it is more common, frankly, in authoritarian systems than it is traditionally in democratic ones.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. I have many more questions, but I think we've come to the end of our time. And thank you very much for coming back on the program, your second time here. Hope we can get you back in the future.
Matt, I would love that. Thank you. I really appreciated doing it when I was in government. It was a little bit more treacherous then. Grateful for the chance now, and always appreciate the good work done at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for inviting me on today.
Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Well, that was an interesting discussion. I think most insightful for me was his point about how sitting administrations may not be able to be as blunt as they would like to in their strategy documents because they do need to maintain relations with other countries, including with competitors like China. On the specific question of whether the goal should be to manage the relationship with China or to win, my view is that the goal should be victory, as I've articulated in my book, We Win, They Lose. So we'll have to see whether the Trump administration and future administrations make progress on that goal. We'll all be watching the upcoming trip very closely. This concludes today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Be sure to subscribe to So What's the Strategy wherever you get your podcast, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.